Hey guys, I thought I'd do a little update video on the car here. I've kept a pretty detailed and extensive build thread on this car on Beamer forums for many years, but I just kind of ran out of energy to keep updating that all the time and managing the pictures and all that. So I thought I'd try starting to do some video logging on this. So for anybody that hasn't seen the car, this is my E30. It's a 1986 325 ES. I've owned the car for 10 or 12 years, raced it for many years. So I originally built this car. It had a 2.8 liter M50 in it with just like all junkyard part motor. And I had a T56 Magnum 6-speed GM trans in it. And I guess kind of the distinctive feature of this car is that it has been back halved in the back. So the factory rear suspension, the independent rear suspension has all been cut out, and I run a 4.9-inch rear end. This rear end came out of like a 1970 something Ford F-150, and then I shortened it down, and it's got a build diff and all that in it. Like aftermarket axles, and basically everything except the housing is aftermarket in it. So runs coilovers. I cut out the entire factory frame of the car. Basically the whole trunk floor from like the rear seats back, and I built a new frame underneath the car with 2x3 rectangular tubing, and then stitched all the sheet metal back in to basically make it unibody again. So I've been running this for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, something like that. It's been completely trouble-free. It drives great. Car is tubbed to the inside. So I have like 13 or 14 inches of wheel clearance. It's basically like the factory outer like wheel arch in here is factory, and then it's tubbed to the inside of that. So right here, this sheet metal is the original fender, and then I just cut the sheet metal at the pinch weld here and cut out all the trunk floor and built in wheel tubs to the inside, and then stitched all the sheet metal back together and made it unibody again. So the whole rear frame and sheet metal integrates this fuel cell into here. This is it's supposed to be a 17-gallon fuel cell, but it actually only fits about 15. And then I made this fuel pump hanger in here that drops on the top. So there's actually, you can see the power and ground wires running in there. There's actually 3 fuel pumps mounted in there that all Y together. And then there's a sump in the bottom that goes through the sheet metal here. So the fuel pump pickups are in the bottom of this sump. So the car is powered by a 2.8 liter M50. This is an M50 non-Vanos block and head. It's a stock bore size with Weisco pistons, eagle rods, and a M52 B28 crank. I use these non-Vanos heads because they have an excellent valve train on them from the factory. As you can see, I have a Vanos unit on this one. The non-Vanos heads this casting is normally filled in right here, so the Vanos unit won't fit. But if you just take an angle grinder and grind out this little piece of aluminum here, then the Vanos module just fits right on it. So you can run Vanos on a non-Vanos head. So the cylinder heads, I just take the heads apart and I port the intake ports only, clean everything up, deck the head surface on a surface plate, and then put them back together. So it's got factory valve springs, factory retainers, factory valves, everything is completely stock in there. This one right now, it's got M52 lifters and M52 trays in it. And these lifters have been converted to solid lifters. So the hydraulic mechanism in them has been taken out and they've been shimmed to be solid lifter. Other than that, it's all basically just stock junkyard stuff. I just build these at home. So I just buy junkyard motors and take them apart and dingle ball hone them, and I do some tweaking to the oil system on them and basically just put them back together. It's got, and I can't see any of it, but it's got a really nice equal length twin scroll tubular manifold that I built for it. Turbo is a Borg Warner Journal Bearing S476 SXE. It's like a maybe 1200 wheel horsepower turbo. I'm not using quite all of that yet, but we're getting there. So I've always run the factory intake manifold, but I'm switching over to this billet intake from Travis Sarno. So there was the factory intake manifold. But so this is going on the car. I've got a new billet fuel rail that's going to go on it. And then I'll just be making like a sheet metal aluminum plenum for this that mounts. I'm actually going to use like a 90 millimeter Mustang throttle body, but it'll be mounted in the stock position, like right around there, just to kind of keep the M50 look of it. So this motor is like 10.8 to 1 compression or something like that. I kind of always intended this motor was going to be my spare motor, and then I was going to put together a different one. But so I'm thinking about putting together another motor that'll probably be like, 11.5, 12 to 1 compression. I've got a set of NM solid lifter camshafts being made for me in Sweden. So those should be here in the next couple weeks. So once I get those, I'll get the motor back together, relash the valves, and then get everything running. And then possibly later I'll build another motor and swap it in place of this one. The only other thing changing with the motor for this year, I've got Travis Sarno's big ATI damper to go on the front. So that actually is necessitating me to change my radiator and intercooler setup. So the way I have this car set up is I use the intercooler as basically the front core support. So the intercooler bolts in on these brackets on the frame, and then the radiator is actually riveted to the intercooler core. But I have the radiator set back on the car like an inch and a quarter from the factory position. And this damper, the new ATI damper, is actually a little bit longer than the factory damper. It's about the same length as like the factory damper with an AC pulley. So it shouldn't be any fitment in any car that came with an M50. But because I set the radiator back, that now causes me a fitment issue that with this intercooler and radiator mounted in the car, the damper is going to rub on the radiator. So I'm going to move the radiator back to the factory location, and then I'm going to have to make a thinner intercooler for this. So let's see, back to the trunk, I guess. So I run this on pump E85 from fuel cell back here. I do run nitrous oxide. I run 2 stages of nitrous. I usually run like a 35 horsepower jet in both stages, but I only use the nitrous for basically anti-lag. So when I'm drag racing, I'm usually using either 1 stage or no stages, just to spool the car up on the line to get the car to spool up against the torque converter. So it'll spray like a 35 shot for like 2 seconds, and then it's up on the converter and ready to go. And then I launch and it just runs through on boost. There's no nitrous flowing. And then I can also run it for like roll racing or just doing highway pulls or whatever. I actually run 2 stages. So it'll engage 1 stage of nitrous at like 3,000 RPMs and the second stage at like 4,500 RPMs. And then shuts one of them off at 5,000 RPMs and shuts the second one off at 6,000 RPMs. So basically it's just there to get the turbo spooled, and then it carries through on boost. So a water methanol system in the car. The ECU controls all this, so this is just kind of a cobbled together setup. It's just a tank I bought on the internet and an AEM pump. So I don't use any like AEM controller or anything like that. It all just runs through the ECU. So the ECU turns on the pump back here, and then the ECU controls a solenoid valve up in the intake manifold that actually injects it. So it's a progressive system. And then I do have onboard air on this car. So this is like a little ARB air locker pump. And it's just an old propane bottle. that I use as a pressure reservoir, and then it's just got a gauge on it and a regulator. So the regulator takes it down to like 50 psi and sends it to the front of the car. And then I do have a hose on here as well for like to air up tires. Batteries back here. Cutoff switch per NHRA spec. Parachute for NHRA for 150 plus miles an hour. Car does have a roll cage in it, so it's got roll cage certed to 8.5. I don't intend to ever upgrade that. It's got Kirky seats. I made these seat brackets in here to mount the Kirkies. It's full interior car, so it's, I mean, door panels, roof, you know, headliner, rear seat, the whole works. The only thing it's missing is the carpet, which I'm probably going to be putting a carpet back in here because there's some class racing stuff that I want to do that requires you to keep a carpet. ECU is mounted on the tunnel back here. It's an MS3 Pro Ultimate. And then I have a whole panel full of relays and fuses back here on the tunnel. So these solenoids up here are the boost control. That is what the onboard air is for. So the air comes up to these solenoids, and one solenoid is a fill solenoid. So one solenoid lets air from the air tank in the back into the top of the wastegate dome, and then there's a pressure sensor in the middle here that gives feedback of what the actual pressure in the wastegate dome is. And then the other sensor is to dump the pressure out. So like the way the boost control on this works is if I command, say, 20 pounds of boost at like a certain mile per hour or whatever, the ECU has a lookup table that it knows that to make 20 pounds of boost, it takes 15 psi of pressure in the top of the gate. So it will open the fill solenoid until the gate gets up to 15 psi, then shuts that. And then like if it overshoots the target, or if the target lowers and it needs to lower the pressure, then the dump solenoid opens. So that's all that I currently run the onboard air for, but I do have one other thing that I'm going to integrate into that I'll show. So I run gauges from Speed Hut. I actually got all these gauges off eBay for like an incredible price. So I've run them for years. It's a GPS speedometer, and then it's just the rest of the gauges are just universal gauges. The switch panel up here controls everything that I need to control. This one right here is the line lock, so locks the front brakes out so you can do a burnout. This is ignition, so this just turns the ignitions, basically turns the ECU on and off. This is push button start. These two here are nitrous, so this turns on one stage of nitrous, this activates the second stage of nitrous, and that's just these two are just telling the ECU to turn the nitrous on. The ECU is the one that actually controls the solenoids. And then these two switches here are fuel pump, so fuel pump 1, fuel pump 2, and then if I switch them in the middle, that's off on the fuel pumps, and then if I turn it down, that manually overrides the ECU and turns the fuel pumps on continuously so that I can test fuel system components when I need to. So just left in the up position, the ECU controls everything. And then the same here, this is the cooling fan, the radiator fan, and the transcooler fan. So in the up position, the ECU controls it. In the down position, it's manually override on. Got harnesses, of course, for NHRA. Window net over there for NHRA. Parachute handle up here for NHRA. Let's see, what else? So exhausts on the car, as you saw from when I was underneath the car, the exhaust goes all the way out the back of the car, or goes basically out, dumps underneath the rear axle of the car. It's a full 4-inch system, and it's got like a Dynamax 4-inch straight through muffler mounted kind of midship in the car. That I'm going to change because it is too loud. It's actually really quiet driving around town. It's not obnoxious at all. You can have a conversation just driving around in town at 30-40 miles an hour. but it's got an awful drone at like 60 miles an hour. So that drives me absolutely bonkers, and I'm tired of that because I like to drive this car and I like to enjoy it. So need a quieter exhaust system. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make a new downpipe here, and I got one of these air operated exhaust butterfly valves. So this is a 4-inch valve, and normally you would just hook this up to a boost source or a boost reference, and it opens at 6 or 7 psi. I'm actually going to control it off the ECU. So I'm going to use my onboard air system with another solenoid in the glove box to control this. So when the ECU commands the valve to open, it will just put pressurized air to the top of this diaphragm and push the valve open. So I'm going to make a new downpipe here that goes around the shock tower and through the fender right here. So this air valve is going to go right in here someplace, and then exhaust will run into this side and out this side and out through the fender. And then right before this valve, there's going to be another pipe Y-ing off of this going down underneath the car. So I'm going to run like a 2.5-inch exhaust all the way to the back bumper. And I'll probably run 2 kind of medium-sized mufflers. Might have to experiment with that and get the kind of sound quality that I'm looking for, or sound level that I'm looking for rather. But I'm hoping that that really quiets the car down and makes it a lot more fun to drive. So, and also the current 4-inch exhaust on here, if you've ever looked underneath an M30 or an E30, there is very, very little ground clearance underneath these cars to put a decent sized exhaust. So like the exhaust is by far the lowest part on this car right now, and the exhaust scrapes on everything. So 2.5-inch will gain quite a bit of ground clearance and should quiet the car down significantly. So I guess, let's see, what else? Ignition system. Another reason for changing this exhaust here, I used to have 6 Holley smart coils mounted on the firewall right here, and then spark plug wires running to the spark plugs. Obviously the coils cannot be there if the exhaust is going to be there. So I'm changing out the Holley coils for a set of Audi R8 coil on plug. So I'm going to have to take the dashboard out and rewire the ignition system to run through the firewall with the rest of the engine harness. And then let's see what else to show up here. There's 2 nitrous solenoids right there, fuel pressure regulator right there. Big thing I guess that I haven't addressed is the transmission in the car. This car, when I originally built it, it had a T56 Magnum in it. That's like a 6-speed GM manual that they put in like Corvette ZR1 and Vipers and all that sort of stuff. But a couple years ago, I actually swapped this over. It's a GM 3-speed auto. So here is a spare transmission case. This is a TH400 case here. So this is a 3-speed auto, and then I make these adapter plates to bolt a GM auto trans to the BMW N96. So this trans that's in the car is like a fully built trans with a manual valve body and trans brake and all that. So it does have a torque converter like a normal automatic transmission, but it has no auto shift functions to it at all. So this is the shifter. There's actually a ratchet shifter mounted underneath the console in here. I actually cut the tunnel and made like a little box for a ratchet shifter to go in there. So unlike a normal transmission, there is no drive. It would be in neutral right now, and if you just pull the stick back, that'd be first gear, second gear, third gear. So there is no automatic function whatsoever. It's just whatever you put the transmission in, it goes in. So I've been very happy with that setup, not changing anything with that. I'm hoping with the new motor setup that will really be pushing the power up quite a bit and the RPM quite a bit. Right now the car made 820 or 830 wheel horsepower through the auto. That was with the factory intake manifold and a set of vac cams. So now I'm upgrading the cams, upgrading the intake manifold, and I'm hoping to kind of shift the power band up quite a bit in the RPM range. The old setup, the power started to drop to kind of nose over at like 7,800 RPMs. I'm hoping to push that up to like 8,500, 9,000, something like that, and make a little bit more power per boost or per pound of boost. So the old setup, yeah, it made 820 at 35 pounds of boost, but I did run it up to 40, 45 pounds of boost. Never dynoed it that way though. But I'm hoping this new setup will make like 900 to the wheels at 30 pounds of boost. That's, you know, it's going through an automatic transmission with a torque converter, so that's kind of shifted. But yeah, I'm really hopeful that this setup is really going to perform. Would like to make the car go a little bit faster. It went 906 at 151 with the old setup. That was at like 30 pounds of boost. The goal for the car is I'd like to get it to 8.5 at like 165 in the quarter mile. And then I'm going to be up on my chassis cert, so I can't go any farther than that. But I'll probably still be able to make some more power than it's going to take to go that far or that fast. Actually, I know I'm going to be able to make more power than that. So once I get there, then I'm probably just going to kind of shift to doing 8th mile racing. And I'm also planning to enter this in Hot Rod Drag Week this year. And would like to do significantly more class racing stuff than I have in the past. I'd really like to get out and do some more note prep stuff, because that's starting to come up here in Minnesota. So yeah, only other thing that's really going to change other than what I mentioned is because I'm pushing the RPM up quite significantly on the motor. I currently shift this at like 8,000 to 8,500. I'm hoping to move that up so that I shift at like 9,000 RPMs. So with that, that's going to change, you know, the gearing in mile per hour. So I am going to take the diff out and re-gear that. So it's got a 3.90 gear in the rear end right now. I'm going to change that to a 4.22. That's the same rear gear that I had in it when I had a T56 Magnum. So that should max out like 9,000 RPMs with a 28-inch tire through a 4.22 gear. That should be like 170 or 175 miles an hour, something like that, just off the top of my head. So yeah, I guess that's all I got going on. So if you got any questions, please ask in the comments. Thanks.